some like top three takeaways that as the GIS professional community you can give us for how we can promote geography and GIS awareness in our kids and in the younger generation?
Well, one of them is to continue to support this idea of GIS days and having open houses for your own operations, your own businesses, your own agencies can have a GIS day event where you invite in executives. Okay, this isn't kind of work very well in the non-physical environment that we're living in. But
Right.
maybe we're going to invent something called a GIS day digital. I don't know. We haven't gotten there yet. It's in November. But that's one that I've seen really work. And when you do that, you invite in classrooms. So you have whole classrooms come to your facility, your business, and they walk around and they're looking and they're totally learning. And they don't get that in a classroom. And once they get this idea that they can play with something that's sort of like a GIS game or a game, and it's called GIS, and that they can actually do something, and this is a big one. The second one is adopt a teacher. There's a man who passed away a couple weeks ago, very famous in my world. His name was Randy Raymond, and he was a inner city teacher in Detroit, Cass High School. He got me first inspired of what to do. Have you ever heard his story?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to spend 2 minutes on this story. He came to me and asked me for a bunch of copies of ArcView for his high school. This was in 1991, I believe it was. I said, oh, yeah, nicey, high school. Sure, you can take it. So he gave the technology to these inner city kids in Detroit and said, what would you like to study? And they're just jiving around, talking. Finally, they said, lead poisoning. Randy was shocked. He said, oh, lead poisoning? What the hell is lead poisoning? Turns out that a couple of the siblings of some of the high school kids got lead poisoning. You know how that works? That lead paint on dilapidated houses that drops on the floor, will chew the lead because it's sweet, and then they lose their brains and they die. So he said, okay, that's a nice issue. Good, congratulations, you did step one. And he said, okay, what's step two? Go measure it. So these high school kids went down to the city and they got all the records of lead paint poisoning, and they then put it onto a map. They geocoded it, and it showed all this pattern. And Randy was again shocked. Wow, that's pretty cool. So he said, okay, why are these patterns of lead poisoning happening? So the kids got the census data. These are just this is a true story. Without much coach, there were 6 kids in this class, and they looked at all the census layers, and they found there was a direct visual relationship between lead paint poisoning and dilapidated housing and poor income. And what happens, of course, is poor income can't, the way you fix it is you scrape the paint off the walls and you paint on top of it with latex paint, and then it's problem solved. So they found that in dilapidated homes from the census, there was a direct correlation. And so, wow, it's like discovery. These kids, can you just imagine? They discovered a relationship between dilapidated homes and lead paint poisoning. And they just went crazy. They just went crazy.
Yeah.
And so Randy said, okay, you've done you observed a problem, you measured it, and you found out the reason for the problem. What next? How are you going to solve this problem? So the kids got together and they came up with a solution. And the solution was you scrape all the paint and you paint it. So let's get all the high school students in Detroit to go do this. So they came up with a solution, but it would cost $300,000. So Randy said, okay, you did number 4, you solved the problem, but you didn't take it to action. So then he said, okay, how are you going to actionize it? So these kids got all these maps, took them down to the city council, hung them up, and bold as brass walked in and said, okay, we'd like to get $300,000 to hire the high school kids to scrape the paint and get it, and they did it. So they got a
Wow.
HUD grant. So they learned citizenship.
Wow.
So think about this. They learned science, measuring. They learned analytics. They learned how to communicate. They learned computing. And these were the bottom end kids. They learned how to articulate. They learned how to be a citizen. They learned all of these things. And those kids went on to University of Michigan. 3 of the 5 of them, I think, went into geography. Now that Randy's passed, I don't really have any record to the past. But that inspired me enough to get a book written for it's called Mapping Our World. It's now obsolete. It's gone through several editions. But that became the backbone of Learn by Doing using GIS. So we replicated it in thousands of schools. Especially in Virginia, there's been a pocket of usage, but it's in Oklahoma, and I'm sure there are schools up by your way that are applying this method, and it's been applied in Kenya for watershed problems, and it's been applied in Turkey for agriculture, and in different places in South Carolina for flooding. Kids in high school magically choose their own problems and they solve them. The 4-H is also well known for the same activity. So what can GIS professionals do? Shit, introduce the stuff to teachers.
I have it on my shelf over here. So
it's absolutely marvelous what happens. So this idea of a Gen Geo is not some abstract idea, nicey. No, I have thousands of schools that have done this, but it does take, I can't do it. It takes somebody who's motivated to be able to get up and do it. So Jody, that would be number 2, is adopt a school and teach the method.
Yep.
And the resources are available to you. There's a guy here called Charlie Fitzpatrick who's been doing this. He was a friend of Randy for many years, and he's helped thousands of schools. We usually normally have kids up on the stage. Last year it was from Ireland and different, they come from all over the world. And we just usually pick one. And there's now this new thing emerging. In my high school years, I took a wood shop, and the idea was you'd take a skill training, and then you could get a job when you got out of high school. Machine workers, well, GIS. There's many more jobs in GIS than are available people to fulfill them. We know that GIS professionals are in great demand. It is the thing that's holding back our profession from transforming the world, is the people that really understand it and can make it work are few and far between. So everybody's always worried about their job. Geez, if you have GIS in your training, there's no need to worry about a job. There's way too much work to do. So some of these high schools, there's a term for this, but I forget what it's called. It's not like trade schools but anyway, high schools want to be able to have this kind of STEM type of learning so that people can actually, get a job, as well as go into college and scare the hell out of their professors because they know more about GIS than the professors. A third thing that we're doing this year that might interest some of your members is we're providing a free version of Learn ArcGIS for all students, college students in the world. This is when we announced it to today, over 70,000 students have already signed up. And this is using ArcGIS Learn lessons together with ArcGIS Pro for a year, all on their own. So